Welcome to AI in Social Care, the podcast for care professionals and like-minded, curious enthusiasts who want to stay ahead of the curve and unlock the potential of AI in social care. I'm your host, David Mance, and my guest today is Alastair McDermott. Alastair is the founder of Human Spark, a consultancy helping businesses make sense of AI and apply it practically. He's also host of about a bazillion podcasts of his own, including the AI-powered business leader and the recognized authority, and writer of lots of books, I think, as well, and AI toolkits and all sorts. Alastair, welcome.
Dave, thanks for having me on the show.
All right, excellent. So first of all, I thought it'd be helpful if you could just tell us a little bit about your own journey into using AI.
Sure. Yeah, so I first did something with a thing called AI way back in probably 1999 when I was doing software engineering in college. And the AI programming that we were doing back then probably looks like comparing a bicycle with a Formula One car because a total world of difference. And to be honest, I completely forgot about AI for the most of the intervening years. I was keeping an eye on it every so often, but it wasn't a big deal. And then, so what happened? So I had a website agency called Website Doctor for many years, about 18 years. And that was my own business, running it as a small agency. And more recently, I've been focusing on marketing for consultants and coaches and people like that. And so I had a podcast called The Recognized Authority. And so I was running my agency and this podcast, which has about 175 episodes. And I was watching the development of AI. And when we got to about January, I think it was January 2023, just after, I think it was November 22 was when ChatGPT 3.5 came out. And that's when I saw, okay, this is kind of like a big deal. And as I started using it more and more, I realized, okay, so first of all, my website business, Website Doctor, websites as a thing are definitely like, it's very easy to make websites now with AI. And so I think that field is going to change completely. And I was just so interested in it that I was talking to a friend of mine. I said, hey, I think about doing this AI stuff. And he said, well, look, if you're going to do it, commit to it properly and go all in. Don't half-ass it, basically. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, I'm going to change my brand. I'm going to go all in, all the chips to the center of the table, because I believe that the AI stuff it's such a world-changing, life-changing thing. It's going to impact on all of us, for the positive and the negative. And so I want to do my part in trying to tilt that towards the positive. And I'm just really fascinated. I've been kind of bridging the divide of technology and business for quite a long time now. And so I'm interested in kind of doing that with AI now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what led me to here. The other thing I want to say just up front is I'm very passionate about this and I can easily go off on a tangent. So I just want to give you explicit permission to pull me back if I go off on a tangent and say, okay, let's get back on topic.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's nice to not look like the bad guy all the time. I've got my, I'm already dressed like a bit of a badass in this cardi, so that's good. That's helpful.
Oh
If
yeah,
you've been
bond
working
building.
for like a couple of years in it, then you're basically like, if you've been focused on AI for 2 years, that's kind of like veteran status, isn't it? Like anyone's talking about
Yeah.
being an expert, that you can't have been doing it for more than a couple of years, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Like, I think that there's no experts in it
Yeah.
really. Like, it's really interesting. Like, even the people doing development in the big AI labs like OpenAI and Google DeepMind, like, even they don't know how AI fully works and don't fully understand it. It's like they say things like, "Oh, it does this," and we don't really understand why. And like, I'll give you a very specific example of that. What they found a couple of years ago, and Google published a paper with this mention in it, where they were talking about prompting, where they write about how you use AI. And they said, when we tell it to take a deep breath and then go through the instructions step by step, when we tell it to do that, the response is about 7% better. And we don't really understand why. And so that's in a research paper from Google for a couple of years ago. And so genuinely, there's a lot of stuff that we don't really understand about how it works, why it works. And yeah, everybody's trying to catch up with where it's at. Now, one of the things that I find is that it's also a moving target, which makes it harder. And so there's a quote from the famous ice hockey skater Wayne Gretzky. He says, "I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where it's going to be." And I think that's really important, is kind of starting to think about, like, as we think about this, either as individuals about our own careers, or as business leaders about our business, or as government leaders about our society, we need to think about where it's going to be in a couple of years' time, and not just where it's at now or in the next 2 or 3 months. And the pace of change is just incredible.
Yeah, That's a really helpful bit of context. I think, yeah, for me, like a lot of this podcast is going to be talking specifically to people working in the care sector, obviously, but I kind of thought, well, with this opening episode, kind of what you're alluding to, really, like everyone's just trying to figure it out and find their way a little bit. And I thought it would be really helpful actually to take a kind of broader and a bit of a beginner view, really, and just especially because, yeah, you're working across all different sectors. We can look at, yeah, how are different people across different sectors adopting AI. So I think, yeah, just if you could give us some initial kind of reflections really on how you see anyone really, but particularly business leaders adopting AI. Could be small, yeah, in those sort of practical ways.
Okay, well, the first thing that I would say is if you're not up to speed with AI, don't worry because many or even most people aren't.
Mm.
One of the most important things to do is experiment and learn and play around with it to get used to how it works. Particularly stuff like the language models, the LLMs, which stands for large language model. That's like ChatGPT or Google Gemini or Microsoft Copilot. Those they work in a particular way, and you'll start to get to understand their kind of the ways that they work, their foibles and the kind of mistakes that they can make as you use them more and more. So I think that experimentation is really important. In fact, I try and build that in when I'm working with companies. I say, look, you have to give people a safe kind of sandbox to play in where they can experiment with new tools, because new tools are coming online all the time from different providers, different companies. We can't just say, hey, this is what you're authorized to use and you can't use anything else. And that's what we see in a lot of bigger companies. There's still organizations out there that say, hey, you can't use ChatGPT or any other kind of AI at all. And what happens in that case is people continue to use it, they just don't tell them. And so they're using unlicensed versions, they're using the versions where your intellectual property isn't being protected. So first thing is that kind of experimental mindset and testing, keeping an open mind and understanding things are changing rapidly and the capabilities of the systems are increasing dramatically very fast, like on the order of, I can't remember exactly which technology it was, but it was something like every 3 months the capabilities were doubling. And that was for one of the kind of subcomponents of AI systems. So it's just like there is a lot of very fast paced development here. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing is about how you can actually use it. So I think of AI in a couple of different ways that we can use it. And one of those ways is the one that most people talk about, which is productivity. And it's really good. Like personally, I'd say I'm about maybe 10 times more productive than I was before AI, probably around that. And that's because I use it very extensively. But I'd say most people can probably see a 1.5 to 2x productivity increase if you were like a knowledge worker. Without too much effort, you could probably get to that if once you get to know how it fits into your workflow. And I think that's one of the hard parts is actually figuring out how can AI actually help me personally with my workflow? That's something that is challenging people. Like, what are my personal use cases? What are the use cases for our department or our team or our organization? And the big issue with that is the big AI companies like OpenAI, they don't really care about that because they're focused on developing ChatGPT 5 and the next model and the model beyond that. And they're all racing each other to get that out there. And so they're not really focused all that much on how it can actually help you today. They're thinking about the next version, the next iteration. And that's a kind of that's hard to wrap your mind around. Like, these people are selling this thing and they don't really care how you use it. They do want to get people using it, and I'm not saying they don't want the revenue. They definitely want people kind of indoctrinated in their system and using it and locked in with their data. They want to get access to your data in part so that if you've got all your data in there, like for example, ChatGPT have turned on something called memory, which is where it'll remember all the conversations that you've had and all the things you've told it so that it can give you more personalized responses later on. And if you start to use that, you probably won't want to move to Gemini or move to Anthropic Claude or something else later because you're kind of locked in because you've already built up this history of conversations and it knows you already. So they do want to get that kind of lock in, but they don't really care all that much about your particular use cases. And they have put out some information because they know they need to help people a bit, but it's not their primary focus. So what that means is that the experimentation part and the sharing of knowledge, particularly in an organization, is really important. Is one of the things I talk to people about is setting up like an AI working group or an AI council within an organization where people can share knowledge, particularly across departments. So I was in an engineering consulting company yesterday, and what we were talking about was, okay, we had a lot of people from one department said that they'd be interested in being on that, but we have to spread it around a bit because we want to be able to spread the knowledge across different groups and teams. So as somebody in one department finds a really good use case for something, share that with the rest of the team. Somebody comes up with a really good prompt. Hey, this is really useful, and this is when I'm using it and what I'm finding. And so sharing the knowledge within a business and kind of helping everybody to increase their own AI literacy. So that's something I think is really important.
Yeah, because it's just such a simple, practical thing. But I think just trying to foster that sort of culture in your organization, because you will naturally have people at all stages in terms of how they're getting on with it and also their interest in it. There'll always be some people there who are like, oh, I just can't think about that right now. I don't want to think about it. So yeah, trying to foster a sense where people are not only sort of allowed to share, but are encouraged to share, and that's kind of known as, yeah, this is something we're trying to do just to help us all. I think, yeah, that's a really nice one.
Yeah, and one of the things I know, one employer who has put in place, I think every month, the most innovative use of AI that somebody comes up with that month wins a prize, and it's like a voucher for a dinner or a bed and breakfast or something like that. It's not a huge deal, but it's just enough of an incentive to get people to share and to show that they care about you sharing it as well. And I think a lot of this is going to be driven by cultures of organizations. I think there are going to be some organizations this just won't work for because their culture is wrong, and others who have a much more open kind of two-way conversation kind of structure rather than top down, and I think they'll make it work really well for them.
What's the biggest kind of misconception that you see business leaders having about generative AI?
One of them is, oh yeah, I tried that AI last year and it was terrible on a free account, and I wasn't using the latest models, and therefore the whole thing is terrible. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
That's possibly the biggest issue that I see that would concern me or worry me, because then you've got somebody at leadership level saying, let's not bother with this whole class of technology, which is crazy.
I've heard you say the risk of inaction is likely to outweigh the risk of adoption. Can you sort of unpack
Yeah.
that a bit?
Okay, so the risk of inaction is likely to outweigh the risk of adoption, because the risk of inaction, not doing anything, when the pace of change is so high and the capabilities are increasing so much, it's already hard to integrate the capabilities of the existing systems. And so if you don't think about integrating those now, as those capabilities increase and your competitors are already looking at ways to do that, you're just going to get left behind because that pace of change is so high. The risk of adoption, like the risks are actually fairly low if you manage those risks properly. And like I've got a free white paper on my website which outlines the risks. You don't even have to opt in for email, you can just go read it on there. But I think that the actual risks are minuscule compared to getting left behind. And just, it'd be like somebody deciding in 1996 that this whole internet thing was not going to work, and we're going to stick with our fax machine, not going to set up a website or have an email address. And they look around in 2005 and they're dead. They're Nokia or BlackBerry or one of those Kodak, one of the companies who just got left behind because they didn't see the change as it was happening.
I guess you kind of answered this a little bit already, but is there not? I just wonder if there'll be care organisations that are like, well, it's not so much a care thing, like because our focus is very much sort of human to human contact. That's never going to be replaced. So, what would you sort of think about that?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. In fact, I rebranded my business just earlier this year to humanspark.ai because I really want to drive the human side and making sure that what we use AI for actually helps us as human beings. I think that's really important.
So, yeah, I thought it could be kind of fun, and we might just totally fall on our faces here, but I thought it could be interesting if might sort of live workshop some ideas. Like, let's imagine I am a fairly small care provider. Let's say I've just got one or two care homes, and I was sort of coming along to talk to you. Like, where would you recommend I start? Where might you see some opportunities for me?
Okay, well, what I'll tell you first is how I approach this with people who I'm working with. If I'm going to talk to a business where they have somewhere between 15 and 100 staff or 15 and 200. That's one class of client that I work with a lot. The other is I work directly with kind of solo business owners, and that's a very different type of business because they're the business and they know everything. But when I'm talking to people who have staff and they have a number of staff, what we do is we actually survey the staff on how are you using AI already, and ask them some questions like, what AI tools are you using? What have you found it useful for? Would you like to get training in it? Would you like, if we select some people to be on a working group or be AI champions or on an AI council, would you be interested in doing that? And finding out, and what are your fears about AI? What concerns do you have about it? And so what we do is we get all this information. And again, I did this just yesterday where I went into a boardroom and I met the executive team. I said, okay, here's all the numbers. The bad news is your staff really don't have a lot of experience with AI. The good news is 92% of them said they wanted training. And so that's really positive. Here's their concerns. Here's their suggestions for ways that it could be used. And so now what's the next thing that I would do is say, okay, all those people who put their hands up as being interested in being potentially AI champions, let's go get those people and give them some foundational training, and they will be the kind of the first cohort. We'll set them up with cross-departmental ways of communication. That might be a Teams chat or a Slack chat or Discord, whatever kind of system they use, where they can share ideas and talk to each other. And then we set up a usage policy. So with those people, because they're the people who know the business. And so we want to have some executives in that working group as well, because we want some senior leadership. This one of the other things is we have to get leadership at companies actually using AI themselves so that they understand it. Because it's genuinely really useful to people in leadership positions. There's a lot of things that it can help us with. So that's my general approach to it. And from that, so I would look then for two-cycle projects, quick win projects, and big win projects. So quick win projects are like, what could we get done in the next 3 or 4 weeks that would actually give us a win? It'll get people on board. It'll show them, hey, this can actually be useful for something. If you have skeptics maybe on the executive board, if you've got people who are kind of a bit reticent about using it, showing them a quick win where it's actually helping is really great. And then we look at the big win projects. And again, I would work with the AI Council or the AI Working Group, whatever they want to call it internally. And we'd say, okay, now what could we do that would actually make a big difference here? And this might be a larger project. It could be a 2 or 3 or even a 6-month project. But these are the ones that make a big difference and deeply impact on several people or even the entire organization. And so those are the ones. And usually what we're doing is we're looking for things where something is repetitive, time consuming, not very pleasant as a task. And those are kind of the places that we would look for those projects to start. And then after that, kind of the next step is to roll out some foundational AI training across the board to all employees, or at least all employees who are interested in it. And then the next step is to see, okay, how can we now start to integrate this in our plan as a business? Because pretty much every business is going to have to do that. So what I'll do is I'll reverse this now and ask you, how do you think what I've just said would apply to the people listening to this? I'm just interested to see how that could be useful for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of quick wins, I would immediately go to something like that sort of model. That, yeah, having a company has a custom knowledge base that they can then just ask a question. Oh, where is that? I don't know what it would be. It might be something about HR. It could be something about finance. But yeah, just when you want to find a bit of information and it's somewhere in your servers and you don't know where, yeah, just being able to ask that question in a, like we do with the conversation sort of format that you get with AI. I can see that being a good quick win that most organizations, well, any really, could put in place. I think in terms of, yeah, bigger ones, those sort of longer term ones, I would say, well, when you're talking about repetitive tasks, something that definitely comes to mind that's a huge issue is hiring people. Like any care company of any size has got to hire a lot of people just because you naturally would have that turnover. And so being able to automate some of the tasks involved in hiring and recruitment, from all the way through from getting that job description written really quick to then optimizing it, to then references and getting DBS, all that stuff. I can just see that if that was automated, that would be huge for a lot of these companies.
There's one thing that I wanted to mention, and this goes back to a question you asked me earlier about I think you asked me about myths. There's one mistake I see people make with AI, which is they try and overcomplicate it too much from the start.
Mm.
And I really encourage people to just get started with something really simple. Like just start out by using regular ChatGPT or Google Gemini or Copilot and just give it some basic information and start chatting with it about how it can actually help you. And just start, like, you don't need to go and set up anything custom. You can just start using it as is out of the box. And then maybe a little bit later, you can start to make things like, we call them custom GPTs. Google has the same thing. They call them gems. Claude calls them projects. It's all the same thing. It's where you give it some custom instructions that are related to you. But you don't even need to do that. You can just write those instructions and say, hey, here's a little bit of an overview of my business or of my organization or of my role. And here's what I want to do. Can you give me some help in doing this and help me think about it? And just start simple with that. Then you can start to build those more complex tools, and then you can start to put in things like agentic workflows and things where you start to chain these tools together, and you have one thing, when that finishes, it kicks off something else. But that's down the line. Just start getting basic AI literacy, where you understand how the tools kind of work and you get a feel for, oh, you know what, I've been using this single conversation for too long. I probably need to start a new conversation, because otherwise it's going to start making more and more mistakes, which is something that happens as you run out of what's called context. So, and you get a feel for that once you've been using it for long enough, but you do have to use it. And that's the only way to get that intuitive knowledge. And then bring in somebody, do some training, buy ebooks on how to do it, or watch YouTube videos. However you want to ingest that training, bring in a local trainer, do online training courses. There are lots of free resources, there are lots of paid resources, but I think that you have to say, okay, this is like maybe back in 1990. I'm not talking about the internet, but I'm talking about when computers just became a standard thing and people started to need to know how to use a computer. And it's just standard now. You wouldn't dream of hiring somebody who didn't know how to turn on a computer and use Microsoft Word or Google Docs or something like that. It's a standard practice. AI is going to be the new standard practice. You got to have AI literacy, and there's a lot of negative sides here that I want to be very open and honest about. Like, there are environmental impacts and concerns about AI. It uses a huge amount of power. Less than some people say and more than other people say. It has gotten more efficient. There's been about a 10x reduction in its power usage with some models. So there have been greater efficiencies, but then we're seeing more people using it. So that's one issue. It does make mistakes. Generative AI in particular, which is the really popular AI that everybody's talking about, it can and does make mistakes. So you need to have a human in the loop, which is what a phrase you'll hear more and more often, where the human fact checks what it outputs, and that's really important. And so we need to be aware of that. And there's even things like we need to be aware of things like potential decline in critical thinking skills and issues like that. Now, personally, I think that I've gotten sharper since AI came around, but I think that's maybe more to do with the way that I'm using it and kind of keeping an eye on the new technology and testing. But I have also heard people be very concerned about their kids just going to ChatGPT and getting it to write their homework without. They're basically just a pass through from ChatGPT to the piece of paper. So yeah, there's a lot of real issues. We should be worried about jobs, and we need to be honest about that. I've taken a simple stand with my business. If an organization wants to simply bring in AI to replace people, and they want to fire 95% of staff and replace them with AI, I have no interest in working with anybody who wants to do that. I want to work with people who want to do more with the same people. And so you can choose to do the same amount of work with less people, or you can choose to do more with the same people. And yeah, so that's kind of that's my personal philosophy, and that's why I changed the brand, because I wanted to make that really clear to people.
Yeah, that's really I think there's lots there to unpack. I think just going back to what you were saying, because when you were sort of throwing over to me, what might people do in a care setting, and I immediately started talking about something actually quite far developed. Whereas, what I think it's really helpful that you're kind of, look, let's just get people literate. Let's get folks doing stuff like making their writing better or helping them write whatever, an email faster. Let's get people to understand just the basics of how to use it. It'd be interesting to just talk about prompts a little bit. I just been in that for a second, but I also appreciate that you're talking about the Yeah, the negative sides of it as well, the environmental concerns. So I don't hear much talk about that from people who are enthusiastic about AI, and yeah, we've got to talk about that. Yeah, just any reflections on the importance of just how to write a good prompt? Is that part of your kind of your AI literacy?
Yeah. So prompts are the ways that we talk to AI. So literally prompts are things that we type in as instructions or speak. And prompts are really important because the prompt will decide what the quality of the output you get is. And so, yeah, it's really important. And what I find is this is one of those things where people will get better and improve at over time. But to start with, really what you want to do is you want to give it some really clear directions. So I have a very simple framework for this, and it's called GOAL, GOAL. And the G for goal is first give it what the goal is that you're trying to achieve. So what are you trying to do? What's the goal of this prompt? What do you want it to do for you? The O is the output. So do you want the format of the output to be something specific? Like, do you want it to give you a table? Or do you want bullet points? Do you want it to be really long or really short, really terse? Do you want it to be friendly or do you want it to be professional? So you can talk about the outputs. That's the goal and then the output. And then A is additional context or anything else. And so this is giving it more background. So what background information can you give it? Any necessary data, any examples, anything like that you can give it. And then the L is actually look at the output. So this is really important. You've got to look at the output and evaluate it and make sure you don't just blindly copy paste something into a report or into an email to a client. You've got to make sure that it's correct. And so that's a really simple kind of framework for this. There are lots and lots of different frameworks. One of the things that I use a lot is I actually use AI to help me write AI prompts. And it's getting a bit meta, but like I've one of many free tools that I've created, which are available on my website, are these custom GPTs that do all these various different things. One of those is an AI prompt writer. And so what you can do with that is you can say, hey, I want to write a really good prompt to do this. Can you help make this better? And it'll actually give you a prompt that's actually much better and much more effective for you. So I use that all the time. And also this gets a bit meta, but I use AI to help me talk to other AI quite a bit. So I have two. I've got one which is doing the work, and then I've got one which is like a manager, a co-worker with me. And so when I'm working on more complex projects, that's when I use that, because one has the context of the job it's doing and one has a kind of a more strategic view, which is helping to write the instructions. So yeah, that's maybe more advanced use case. But for the really simple stuff, go with the goal prompt.
Yeah.
Tell it the goal, the output, anything else, and then look at the output.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Just a quick word on, because I know there's going to be folks who are using personal ChatGPT accounts at work. Just any kind of advice in terms of making sure that's GDPR compliant. Can it be?
Yeah. So there are some settings. So there are some settings. Basically, look at the bottom and see, does it say OpenAI does not use your data to train its model? And most of them will have, I think Gemini has something similar. It'll tell you if it's training. So if it's saying it's training on your model, that means it's taking your data and putting it into the model, which you don't want. So for privacy, there are options in the settings for data privacy. So effectively, like at a very basic level, there's private AI and non-private AI. So private AI is where you can put stuff in and it doesn't go anywhere else. Assuming we trust the provider, it doesn't go anywhere else. And then there's the non-private, which is you can't really trust it. It's probably being used as training data. There might also be humans reading it. So you really don't want to put in like anything like proprietary information, confidential information, health information about your clients, things like that. So typically when you pay for AI and you have a paid account, typically, and this doesn't apply to all of them, so you need to check, but typically they will not train on your data and it'll be private to you. When you don't pay for it, the default for most of them is they do use it for training because it's great information for them to use for training data. So just be careful, make sure that you're using a paid account or that you have the privacy settings turned on so that it's not training on your data. That's really important. And then if you get into like healthcare situations where you've got client healthcare information, then you probably need to have a more secure option.
Yeah.
And that might need a kind of something like an open source LLM, which is running on your own private server somewhere. And that would be a completely different type of solution. It would still have the same functionality, but it would be a different solution, and it would probably cost a bit more to set up because the more security, it's more complex to set up. But if you were doing something with patient records and things like that, then maybe that's what you need to do. So it really depends on the regulations around around patient information and things like that. So that's not something I'm an expert in, but I'm sure if you ask ChatGPT, it'll give you some advice. But maybe you need to talk to a legal expert for that.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's go back broader. Where do you see AI like creating the most impact in the next 12 months or so?
This is really interesting. So I think that if all AI development stopped right now and we got no further developments, I think it would take us about 20 years to integrate all the current technology that we have, because organizations change so slowly. And so like it's an interesting thought experiment. It can't stop and it won't stop. But if it did, then I think it would probably take us, most organizations would take 5 or 10 years to integrate everything. And then the really slow ones would take longer than that. And so it's hard because it's a moving target. And then the fact that it's increasing in capabilities so much, like one of the biggest issues I think is that it's still like, particularly with these large language models, the LLMs and generative AI, it's still making a lot of mistakes. And so that causes trouble because that can kind of snowball. So, and there are things that you can do about that, like, for example, the human in the loop, but you can even have one AI fact checking another AI. You can do things like that, assuming that you've trained them properly in that way and that they have access to a good source of data or that the systems are set up properly. There are ways to reduce the amount of mistakes and things that it makes. But I think when we see these agentic workflows, which is where you have one AI does something and then a manager AI gets another AI to do something else, and then the output of that goes as an input to something else. And this is the type of stuff where it uses your computer, it moves your mouse around the screen, it opens a new tab, it can do stuff on your computer, it can do your work. When it starts to do that, I think that's going to be incredibly powerful. It's going to be great. For example, you and I are both podcasters. So instead of us having to do editing and then upload files and put in the show notes and all of that, we'll be able to click a button and say, hey, here's the podcast interview that I did with Alastair. Just go do everything and get it ready and put it up and make sure it's on Spotify and iTunes and everything for me, so I don't have to do any of that. We'll get to that stage at some point, something I'm looking forward to, but it's not quite there yet. But it's very close to that particular task. But then for more complex tasks, it's interesting. Like, there's so many different aspects to this. Like, we're seeing that the human AI interaction, we've seen that, for example, there was a study where, I'm not sure of all the details of the exact stats because it was a while ago, but they found that an AI and a doctor on their own were examining medical records or looking for a medical issue. And so you would think, okay, so we found before that AI can be better at detecting medical issues than humans. And so you would expect that the human and the AI would be the best. But actually, what would happen was the human would overrule the AI. So actually, the AI on its own had the best stats of all three of those options, which is kind of crazy. So like and that's just one use case in one very specific scenario. But we're finding like that kind of thing is happening where like maybe we're better off. Like I know that like in commercial flights, the automatic co-pilot is actually autopilot is actually doing most of the flying for most of the journey, and is probably safer for landing the plane than the humans are. So there's stuff like that. I'm really looking forward to when I don't have to drive and it can just drive me to work, and it can take me to wherever I need to go, so I can either sleep in the back of the car or work on my laptop, things like that. I'm looking forward to that day coming. Still a while away, but I think that at some point, like, there will be a generation of kids talking to their parents where they say, oh my God, they used to allow humans to drive cars? That sounds so dangerous. And to us right now, that sounds crazy, but that's going to be the case at some point.
Yeah, I guess what's so funny about it is, yeah, it's safer, but you get all this ethical questions around it, which then are what's kind of
Yeah, you get the trolley problem, which is
yeah,
if AI gets to decide if one person dies or five people die, should it choose the one person?
yeah,
Does it pull the lever to, and why? And what if you know that person? What if that's your kid? There's all sorts of that. Like that's an old school moral,
yeah.
ethical debate problem. But now applying that to AI is interesting as well. If it gets to make a decision, I think right now what Tesla do in their cars, if it's has to make a decision like that, is it hands back control to the driver, and so it kind of delegates the problem away. So I might be wrong on that, but that's my understanding of what happens. So like fascinating problems to think about, but I think we really we need to talk about what this is going to do to jobs. Anybody who can work remotely effectively could be completely replaced by AI within 5 or 10 years, like me included. So, and there are people who are very skeptical of that, and like I understand that, but like I just see the pace of change is so big, and then we have to think about all of the other ethical issues of the things we talked about already, environment, and like how is it going to impact our education system. Like the education system right now is like they've got their heads in the sand. I was talking to somebody who works in third level here in Ireland, and they said it takes, if we want to propose a new syllabus and get it taught in a classroom, it takes about 6 years from proposing the syllabus to it being taught in the classroom. And I'm thinking, well, if you were teaching where AI was 6 years ago compared to where it is right now, like you're going to be a long way behind the times. And that's not even including like the fact that people are getting kicked out of colleges being accused of plagiarism because they use the wrong dash in their like they put an M dash in, which makes it look like it was written by AI, or they use a grammar checker, they use Grammarly or something like that, and they're accused of plagiarism and kicked out. And then on the other hand, we have people where the college lecturer is saying, hey, you can't use AI to write your essays, but then they go and they use it to grade the essays. So it's like, well, that's very interesting. So like I think that like the whole education system, like there needs to be lots of conversations. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this is it's so broad. It impacts on every kind of strata of our society, education, life, work, everything. And so every vertical, every different niche needs to be talking about how it impacts their particular niche. And that's why I think what you're doing here with this podcast is really good, because now you're talking about how it affects people in the care field. And I think that's important because those, like every field needs to talk about how does this impact us specifically, because nobody else is going to help you with that. You've got to figure it out.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. I think that's a really good note to end on. I think you've really helped us to just, with this first episode, just take a big broad look, and we touched on all sorts of areas here. So yeah, I love it. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Just don't get overwhelmed. It's very easy in AI to get overwhelmed. Take a step back, take a deep breath, like the AI does, and just start simple. Just start experimenting with it. Try and turn off your skepticism if you've got skepticism turned on, because when you don't know how to use it properly at the start in particular, what it produces for you won't be very good. But as you get better at using it, what it'll give you will be better. So remember to give it lots of additional context, give it lots of that background information when you're using it, and it'll get much better for you.
Okay.
So that's my kind of simple takeaway from this if you want to get started.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. All right, brilliant. Alistair, if folks want to find out more, if they want to get hold of all these amazing resources that you've kind of referenced, where can they find you?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. So follow me on LinkedIn. I'm sure there'll be a link somewhere. Alastair McDermott is my name. And look up humanspark.ai. And I've got, in particular for business leaders, if you're trying to lead your organization, I've got a free toolkit. You don't have to opt in for email or anything like that. It's at humanspark.ai/toolkit. So you're more than welcome to go check that out. I've got tons and tons of resources on my website. I have way too many to name. So yeah, go check that out. And I've got some books and stuff on Amazon as well. So if you look up my name, you'll find me, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I can vouch for that. I've got lost down the massive rabbit holes of your various resources. So yeah, be careful, folks. You could lose whole days down there.
Hopefully it's useful. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
So
it's
well,
my
look,
main.
it's been great, and thanks for having me on it. Like I love talking about this. As you can see, I could talk for days about it, but I think it's really important that we talk about all these things, the positives, the negatives, and all the rest of it.
All right, fantastic. All right, that's it for today. I'm David Mance, and I hope you join me again next time for AI in social care. All right, amazing. Thanks, Alistair.